services and outcomes.
Thank you, Mayor, Commission. We have with us William Waters, the Director for the Department of Community Sustainability, and Mark Woods, our Code Enforcement Function Director. Manager, I'm sorry. As they're warming up the presentation, it has been asked, I can't remember the first time it was asked. I think
2 years ago.
It's been asked several times to pull together a presentation that could be used to go out and educate people on what the code process is. Chapter 162, you know, it's quite arduous. There's a lot of things that are required, and most people don't realize when they call code or have a code issue that we're regulated by these state rules and the laws, and there's all these steps we have to take. So putting this presentation together, that was the original intent. While we were going through it, we also said, you know, code enforcement in the last couple of years has gone through some tremendous phases. I know when I got here, it was in sort of a state of disarray. We had some changeovers in the management staff. We decided that things were fairly broken to the point that we needed to consider contracting it out. We had toured and looked at Pompano Beach, which actually contracts out their code enforcement. Went through a whole process last year where we did just that. It turns out that unfortunately, the bids we got from the private entities that do code enforcement, we're going to charge us more, or the same to what we were paying, but do less. That's what was the problem with that. So we decided, let's rebuild the code enforcement department. We're going to keep it in house. So most of the staff, most of the staff has been here less than 2 years, a year. We brought Mark on in February. Yeah, it's February.
Okay.
So he's a newbie as well. And the tremendous strides that have been made in taking the laws and the changes in the code and the cleanup that y'all have authorized, and then actually taking it and creating the staffing function and the operation to enforce and implement that policy has been a tremendous task. So hopefully through these slides you'll see those two things come alive. The process and what we're doing in our performance measures and what the code staff is doing. So without further ado, I introduce, I don't know which one's going to go first here, William or Mark?
For the record, William Waters, Community Sustainability Director. We spent a great deal of time trying to put together a presentation that is elementary at its basis, but it gives you a broad overview of how code compliance works in the city, as well as what has been done over the past 3 years, of which we have fairly good data to track. And I'm going to let Mark sort of explain. He's better at understanding 162 and the whole code compliance process than I, but I'm here as well to answer questions historically or moving forward. So here's Mark, who is our code compliance manager.
Be sure to use the mic.
Thank you, William. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Commission. As Michael said in his introduction, the basic principle of what we're doing tonight is explaining to you basically the historical reboot that we've had now for the code compliance process. Its workings, its inners and outers, the functionality of the division and how it interacts with the community and the like. For the purpose of providing insight tonight, we'll be talking mostly about the code enforcement process and those types of things. Clearly, at this sitting, at this juncture, there's not enough time to go as deeply as we would like for this, but hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of our processes, those things that encompass our day-to-day activities and how it interacts and how it relates to the vision and the standards that you as a commission have set for us. First and foremost is how we're governed. Chapter 162 of the Florida statutes is that governing principle that guides the entire code enforcement process. Clearly, the cities have home rule authority to be able to come up with their own rules on how they would manage enforcing their ordinances and their laws and things of that nature. But as is most cities in the state of Florida, we have elected to follow the model of 162, which outlines basically 4 or 5 principal sections and principal activities that we'll talk about tonight. First and foremost, the first part is the creation of that code enforcement process. Originally, back in the early 80s, when this statute was passed, it was called the Code Enforcement Board. Some of you, I know Commissioner and Vice Mayor Maxwell has some history as a code enforcement board member. For the purposes of tonight's conversation, if I slip and say board, it is the exact same thing as a code enforcement special magistrate. There is no difference, except in the number of people that are serving in that capacity. The board is made up of 5 to 7 members based on your population, whereas a special magistrate is a singular entity to hear those cases, but they both operate with the same authorities. The second part is the intent of that chapter of 162. The intent in and of itself was for the general purpose of creating a standard functionality or standard design for enforcing codes within the municipalities and local government that was 1, expeditious, 2, equitable, and most importantly, that it was effective. And those 3 principles are how we govern what we do and why we do what we do. The third part is the enforcement procedure. Those procedures are outlined by that state statute as they provide information and direction as to notice, as to reasonable compliance time, the right to be heard, which is called due process, and how we deal with life safety issues that may operate outside of the parts that I'm actually going to explain to you tonight. And the fourth part would be the requirements for the notice itself, the time frames built into that, what parts have to be a part of that. All notices have to have, all parts have to have different varying degrees of service time in those notices. Michael talked about the time frame built into the process and how long it takes for us to get from the beginning to the end. But you'll see after our presentation tonight that a lot of that is out of our control as to how we do it and how long it takes for us to do it. Every notice, if we talk about the due process principles, every notice has to first and foremost have service, meaning that that notice has to be adequately provided to the person that you're saying is in violation of some type of duly enacted ordinance or law. That service can be achieved in several ways, but it has to be achieved nonetheless. You can have it, and generally what most cities use is a certified mail process. Recently in 2012, the Florida statute changed to allow cities not to have to request the green card receipt anymore. You send the certified mail and you're allowed to just be able to just certify that mail was at least received. So that's helped a little bit. But the second part of that is if that certified mail is not received, then we as a city have to go the next step now, which is to either post the property with a copy of that notice, and that posting would also have to be done here in the local government offices, or you could hand deliver that notice. Hand delivery clearly is the fastest of those options, but hand delivery is oftentimes, especially for a community like Lake Worth, not the preferred method in as much as this is a working class community, and the hours that we're here, most people are at work as well. So hand delivery doesn't work nearly as well as it would in a more retirement type community. But because of that, we still have to make sure that notice is served in every capacity. Secondly, that every part of the process, everything that we do, anytime we're requiring anything to be done, noticing for violation, noticing of hearing, that person that we're noticing has an opportunity to be heard. There was a federal case, a Supreme Court case, Massey case, that requires that no matter what point of the process we're involved in, that respondent has an opportunity to be heard. So, in years past, there was the cowboy attitude of doing things. They cite, they take to a hearing and just go, and never having made sure that person has an opportunity to be heard. And that opportunity is applicable to every part of the process. And lastly, when it comes to due process, you have to be reasonable. The statute is very clear in its delineation of reasonableness being the measure as to what it requires for when you talk about time constraints. Excuse me. Reasonable is determined strictly by what you're asking them to do. Clearly, if you're asking someone to cut their grass, reasonable time would not be 45 days. But if you're asking someone to get a permit to put on a new roof, then reasonable will probably be a lot more than 45 days, simply because of the processes involved. But whatever it is, we have to make sure that our notices delineate that reasonableness in order to keep us from a situation where we could be later brought to some type of suit. The Code Compliance Division is a part of the Community Sustainability Department, and it's often confused with the Building Division, the Business Tax Receipt Division. It's all, because it is a hybrid of those things, we often get confused for all of those purposes and processes. However, I'm going to just go through this a little bit tonight so you can see exactly how it's delineated in our cities. Yes, I do, thank you. If I can just figure out where, okay. Clearly, Mr. Waters is the Community Sustainability Director. That would be my position as the manager. And from the manager, we have a Community Code Compliance Coordinator. Say that fast 3 times. And we have 2 community technicians, 7 community code officers, and what has been budgeted and approved but not yet filled is a remediation secretary. Each one of those positions has a direct responsibility within the entire operation. Clearly, my position is to manage the operation of the entire division. The coordinator, community coordinator, is the person who coordinates the activities of the community code technicians, those 2 persons, and in the future, the remediation secretary, the activities of their daily duties. And then under my direct supervision are the 7 code compliance officers that we have on staff. I say 7. Right now we have 6, but we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. As you can see, our city here, the different areas of color delineate the zones where our officers are assigned. Each officer is assigned a geographic zone of the city where they're responsible for doing everything that every officer does within that zone. So they basically are their own boss within that zone. They're doing everything, every part of our process is being activated by everyone there. For the purpose of tonight's discussion, Zone 1 right now is where we're vacant a position, but we're actively recruiting that as we speak, and that should be filled in short order. Now, what do we do? Well, first of all, we have a myriad of programs and designed for the purpose of allowing us to get to those standards that you've already talked about tonight. There is the traditional code compliance process, which, as it stands, is what I just explained through the 162 process. That's the traditional code compliance. We have nuisance abatement, which is basically an activity that's generated by our PDSO, and we've worked very closely with them in that process. It's determined by police calls, service calls, and the chronic nuisance, which is also PDSO initiated. Again, that's generated by service calls, but of a different order. Our chronic nuisance services, those are the things that are handled more directly in-house with us. Demolitions, board and secures, and lot clearing. Those things are the things that we would do as it relates to chronic nuisance services, which are the life safety things that operate just outside of that 162 format that I gave you. And lastly, our vacant, foreclosed, and abandoned property. While we don't actively research those for ourselves, the vacant property, we do partner with Community Champion Corporation. They changed their name. They were vacantregistry.com. It was much easier to say too. But we do partner with them, and they do the research for us to determine which properties are listed as vacant, foreclosed, and or abandoned. And we, as a part of that, we require them to register those properties with us. First and foremost, to give us a point of contact for when those properties are in a state of non-compliance that would allow us to be able to go directly to somebody and start that process without having to go through the entire code enforcement process that is generally rather lengthy. Our code officers all report to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. They report for duty at 8, and they have these specific duties are what they do. A lot of times you hear, well, all these, I think I even heard somebody talk about it tonight, that, the government employees, they don't do anything, they ride around all day and park up under trees and that kind of thing. Well, quite honestly, there was a time when that was true. And that's a part of this reboot that we're having for our division and our department, is to kind of dispel some of those rumors, or to put some of those rumors that may have been very well achieved through no fault of our own. We'd like to be able to dispel those now and go forward in the future and actually twist that around and actually give people service for what they're paying for. As you can see, the officer's day is filled with an entire myriad of duties and activities. 8 to 9, they have 2 sets of office hours, 8 to 9 in the morning and 4 to 5 in the afternoons. During those times, they do the same activities during those times, but if you think about it, that's 2 hours a day to do the paperwork and all those things that are associated with the work they're doing in the field, which in and of itself probably isn't enough, which is why a lot of that stuff kind of just spills over to the next day. Because if they go out and do 20, 30 inspections in a day, they could probably have enough paperwork to last them 2 or 3 days worth of paperwork based on those things. And within all that time, they still meet with citizens, trying to resolve the issues that they've already previously cited, as well as create and return phone calls, emails, and those types of things. So it's a very time-consuming, while not difficult in and of itself, it's time-consuming and it requires the hands-on attention of those officers. During the 9 to 4 hour, those officers are out in the field doing exactly what you tasked them to do. They go from property to property. They have assigned inspections that they do on a regular basis. Every officer gets use and occupancy inspections. We talked about that with the gentleman talking about the landlord issues. We go into those properties on a regular basis every day, as many as we can schedule within a reasonable time frame. We have scheduled inspections based on compliance efforts. We cited someone and we've given them till tomorrow to check it out, to get it done. Well, tomorrow comes and we have to go and see if they've done it. So those are all assigned inspections that are based on previous day's work or previous day's request for work. Outside of that, they're to ride those geographic areas that I've shown you before, and they're to do proactive code enforcement, meaning that they ride those streets, and things that catch their eye as being a non-compliant issue are the things that they should now generate a new case for. Our cases are generally started with a courtesy notice. The mayor talked about it being compliance now and not enforcement, and that's a very deliberate term. We don't want people to feel like that we're the gotcha Gestapo. That's not our issue. What we'd like is to see properties be brought up to a current standard that everybody can be satisfied with. And to that end, we take courtesy notices, which is not a part of that 162 model that I gave you. Courtesy notice is just what it says. It's a courtesy. We're providing you an opportunity to say, dear sir, dear ma'am, you have an issue. What you need to do is deal with your issue. But if you don't, we'll be back to see you. And then the next step starts, that paperwork that we talked about, the 162 model, is what will start after that. And that's generally what happens during the officer's workload day. What we have here is an actual data points that point to whether or not we're successful in doing what it is that we're tasked to do. As I said earlier, our job is to be expeditious, efficient, and equitable. Those are the things that we do. And these stats point to those things. By and large, we collect a lot of statistics here. And if any of you are familiar with a high-performance organization, we don't want to be what they term in those vernaculars as a drip organization where we're data-rich and information-poor. What we'd like to have is data that clearly points to successes and failures. Data that allows us to be able to look to it from a forecasting standpoint to be able to say what we can do going forward to make the process improve. And these are some of those data points. Over the years, from 2012 till 2014, you can see some of those data points, and there are some that have zeros in the earlier years where we're starting to collect those things now. And going forward, we'll do even more streamlining of our data so that it does even further accentuate those standards and the things that we'd like to see as being an indicator of our successes and failures. I'd like to draw your attention, though, to the bottom portion of this list, where you can see where it starts at vacant property registration revenue here. I draw your attention to it simply for the sake of saying that's where the revenue portion of this starts. What has been a misnomer for code compliance in years past is that it's a revenue generator. While it does generate revenue, clearly, $469,000 as of this year. It clearly generates revenue, but if we're doing it the way that it's supposed to be done, if we were in a perfect world, that would be zero and we'd have all compliances. So what we'd like to get to in a perfect world is we don't get any revenue for people being in violation, people come into compliance, and that's really where we'd like to get to. So what is compliance? Well, this is an example of what compliance looks like. That's a B4E. On that first picture, that's that same property later on, probably about 3 months later. And that's just a picture of just an example of what can be done through the code compliance process if people adhere to it. As well as demolitions before and after. We do both city-initiated demolitions as well as owner-initiated demolitions. And our demolitions are a big part of what we're going to be doing going forward to try and bring the properties that have for years past been left in a dilapidated condition. Those properties now are being, if they can't be repaired, they're going to be gone. And if we'll use that vacant canvas now to paint a new picture altogether. Lot clearing before and after. Hopefully this doesn't show anybody's house that's in the room. Our board secures before and after.
Scott, was that your?
We talked about data that point to the code compliance. Thank you. We talked about the
Ryan
data.
Chambers, city manager.
It was her.
I was very careful not to put addresses in the picture. The data that we talked about earlier were those data points that point to the code compliance inspector's performance. But clearly, as I've said before, we have a lot more than just the inspectors in the division. And these data points actually point to the more generalistic compliance efforts and the more generalistic performance measures that we as a division operate. New cases open, letters sent, these kind of things. Clearly the inspectors aren't sending those letters. They're generating, they're starting the initial process, but that's done by the administrative staff. And this points to the division as a whole as to how we've performed over the year. And what I would like to draw your attention to is this number here. We've budgeted a certain number, $395,000, as a potential for revenue for the year, and we were $74,357 over that number. So, again, it's not intended to generate revenue, but when it does, it's a good thing. We'll take that. The next thing I want to talk about is our traditional code compliance process that we talked about earlier, and this is just a flow chart that shows you how it works, and this is going to explain some of that time constraint that we talked about. The very first thing that happens is we get a complaint, whether it's from a citizen, a phone call, an email, a walk-in, someone leaving it on our website. We get complaints from all different areas. Once we get a complaint, we enter that complaint into our computer system. It's given a case number so we can track it from beginning to its resolution one way or the other. While that will cause some consternation for us as it relates to our data from years past because we haven't been doing it, it does give us now a point going forward now to be determine whether or not we're doing a good job of answering those complaints. Clearly, we are a service industry, and because we're a service industry, we need to be able to document our service, whether or not we're responding correctly. So once we get that complaint, the officer is going to go out, they're going to investigate it, and if they see a violation, the first thing they do is, again, leave that love note on the door. Dear Mrs. Jones, dear Mr. Sam, you have an issue that you really need to address. I'm going to give you X amount of days depending upon what the violation is, and I need you to take care of it in that time. Here's my number. Call me when it's done, and I'll come out and look at it again. Now, by and large, our compliance rates are somewhere about 65–70% for those things that we've cited, which is pretty close to the state norm. But for that 35 to 40% of the community who has chosen not to be an upstanding citizen, that courtesy notices will then turn into an official notice of violation / notice of hearing. We are one of the cities that has opted to send both of those notices in one document. There is no requirement to do it either or. It's just a matter of preference, and I think that for our purposes, sending the notice of violation and hearing in the same document works for us, considering the time constraints that are already built into this process. At every step of the process, there's an opportunity, however, for that owner, that dear John or Mrs. Smith, to come into compliance. As you can see, once they're given that door hanger, the first thing that they can do is to bring the property in compliance, and the case is closed at that point. But if they don't, then yeah, we have to take it to the next step. The next step is that violation letter. Well, if they don't bring it in, they give another opportunity, again, with a reasonable time frame to bring it into compliance, and if it's not done at that point, then it goes to the next step of actually scheduling for a hearing. Well, they have an opportunity to comply though. And what we'd like to do is make sure that at every step of the process, there is an opportunity to bring the property into compliance. As you can see, for as many tags that are on this flow chart, there is many tags that show the opportunities for that person to come in compliance. Because again, that is our goal, to bring the property into compliance.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Does the love note also come with you're gonna have to go before the magistrate if you don't comply?
No, not at that point. Not at that point.
So the two items, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow this. What two items are sent at the same time?
Notice of violation and notice of hearing.
Okay, so the warning is not,
No,
warning
that-
is single,
Correct. And the warning is just that, a warning.
then comes the next two.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That notice of violation and hearing will tell that respondent, I'm going to give you again a reasonable time to take care of this. This is your official notice now because this is sent certified mail. This is your official notice and I'm going to give you a time frame to take care of it. But if you don't, you're scheduled to come to a hearing on X date, whatever X is at that point. At the point that that hearing happens, the magistrate or code enforcement board will sit in adjudication of that hearing, of that case, and they'll make a determination of whether or not the property is in fact a violation of the duly enacted city codes. And that's clearly all that he or she is there for, to determine whether or not there has been a violation of city code. If there has been, then that magistrate will then establish a deadline again of reasonable amount of time to bring that property into compliance and establish a monetary fine to accrue if it does not happen after that reasonable time frame. But at every step, you have the opportunity to bring it in compliance before any of that happens. Now clearly, just like any other quasi-judicial process, there are penalties for the further you go into the process, the more you're penalized. If you ever had a ticket and had to go to traffic court, you know the fact that you had to go and talk to that judge means that you got to pay court costs. This is no different. If you have to go to a hearing and actually present your side of the case, there will be court costs that are assessed at that point that cannot be alleviated. If you're given that time and you bring it into compliance, your case is closed, you have the court costs that will be assessed, but that's it. It's done at that point. If you do not, then the next step is for the city now to take its next step in the process, which is to file that accruing fine as a lien against the property. This lien encumbers the property for 20 years, at which point the city can either take the step to foreclose that lien after 90 days of being filed, or they can recertify that lien after 20 years. In most cases, that doesn't happen, the recertifying of that lien, but it's a possibility. The property owners can, again, they always have an opportunity to comply, so if they pay the fines, pay the liens, bring the property